My cousin evicted me but let me keep the trash. I sold it for $14,200,000. The house smelled wrong. That's the first thing that hit me when I walked through the door that Tuesday morning. Not the comforting smell of Grandpa Frank's workshop. That mix of solder flux and old coffee and WD-40 that had been the background scent of my entire childhood. No, this was bleach. Industrial-strength bleach mixed with something floral and fake, like someone had tried to scrub away 5 years of memories in a single afternoon. I stood in the doorway of what used to be the living room, my work boots leaving dirt marks on the freshly mopped floor. My hands were still stained with thermal paste from a server rebuild I'd been doing when Aunt Linda called me 3 hours earlier. Hadn't even had time to wash up properly. Just grabbed my keys, threw on a semi-clean shirt over my work clothes, and drove straight over. The furniture was different. Wrong. Grandpa's old recliner was gone. The radio bench where he'd sit for hours tuning into shortwave broadcasts from ships in the Pacific, that was gone too. In their place was this stage setup that looked like something out of a real estate catalog. Neutral beige couch, glass coffee table, fake plant in the corner. Brad was sitting at the dining table like he owned the place. My cousin, 42 years old, and still trying to look like he was 25. His teeth were too white, those veneers that rich guys get but never quite look natural. His suit was Brooks Brothers, I could tell from the cut, but it was pulling tight across his shoulders like he'd bought on sale 2 sizes ago and refused to admit he'd gained weight. The whole package screamed success, but up close you could see the cracks. The cologne was expensive, sure, but underneath it was cigarette smoke. His watch was a Rolex, or at least a very good fake. He was tapping a pen against the table. Mont Blanc. The sound echoed in the empty room, sharp and rhythmic like a countdown timer. Tap, tap, tap. Each click felt like it was drilling into my skull. Aunt Linda sat next to him, her face tight and pinched like she'd been sucking on lemons. She didn't look at me. Neither of them did. Not really. They looked through me, the way you look at a problem that needs to be solved. There was no offer coffee, no condolences, no acknowledgement that we just buried the man who raised half this family when our parents couldn't be bothered. Grandpa Frank had been gone exactly 2 weeks. The funeral was last Wednesday. It was now the following Tuesday. Apparently, that was enough time for the vultures to circle. On the table between us was a stack of papers, legal documents, the kind of that heavy cream-colored paper that lawyers use to make everything seem more official. Settlement agreement was printed across the top in bold letters. Brad finally looked up at me. His expression was something between pity and impatience, like I was a dog that hadn't learned its trick yet. He told me they'd had the property assessed. Professional evaluation, he said. The foundation was cracked. The roof needed replacing. The electrical was from the 70s and probably a fire hazard. The plumbing was shot. Bottom line, the repairs would cost more than the house was worth. Way more. They had the inspector's report if I wanted to see it. I didn't ask to see it. This is where it got interesting. Brad slid the settlement agreement across the table toward me. He explained it real slow, like I was stupid. Like 5 years of keeping Grandpa's systems running, managing his medications, making sure he didn't fall in the shower, like all that had somehow damaged my ability to read basic English. The deal was simple. I would sign a general release and waiver of claims. That's a legal document that basically says I forfeit any right to challenge the estate or claim the property in probate court. No fights, no arguments, clean break. In exchange, they wouldn't sue me for what they were calling unjust enrichment. That's a legal term for when someone benefits unfairly from a situation. Their argument was that I'd lived rent-free in Grandpa's house for 5 years while taking care of him. Therefore, I owed them, let me say that again, I owed them for changing bedpans, for driving him to dialysis 3 times a week, for sitting with him at 2 a.m. when the pain was so bad he couldn't sleep, and all he wanted was someone to keep him company while he listened to his radios. The math of family is always ugly, but this was something special. Brad was still talking. He had this way of smiling while delivering bad news, like he was doing you a favor by being the one to ruin your day. He said they were being generous. They could have called the sheriff, Had me removed for trespassing. They could have filed suit for back rent. But family is family, right? So they were giving me this option. Sign the paper. Walk away. Keep whatever junk was in the garage. Clean slate. Aunt Linda nodded along like a bobblehead. She'd been nodding for 40 years, agreeing with whoever had the loudest voice in the room. I picked up the document. My hands left smudges on the paper. Thermal paste doesn't wash off easy. The print was small, dense blocks of legal language designed to make your eyes glaze over. Whereas in Here To and Party of the first part, I'm not a lawyer, but I've read enough technical documentation to know how to parse dense text. You slow down. You look for the definition section. You check the footnotes. Section 4 caught my attention. Personal property. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Party B, that was me, Michael Raymond Collins, hereby relinquishes all claims to the real property located at 4127 Oakmont Drive. However, Party B retains full ownership rights to the contents of the garage, workshop, and all associated movable and intangible assets located therein. Intangible assets. That phrase sat there on the page like a loaded gun nobody had noticed. I looked up at Brad. He was checking his phone, probably looking at stock prices or ESPN or whatever is that guys like him look at when they're pretending to be busy. I asked him about that section, about the garage stuff. He waved his hand like he was swatting a fly, said I could take all the junk, all that radio garbage Grandpa had been hoarding for 50 years. Old receivers, transmitters, boxes of vacuum tubes that probably didn't even work anymore, scrap metal and wire. He actually used the word detritus. Rubbish. He thought he was being clever, using a word that made him sound sophisticated, like he was discussing industrial waste management instead of his grandfather's life work. He said I could have it all, the whole collection of obsolete technology. He even laughed, said maybe I could sell it on eBay, make enough for first and last month's rent somewhere. Aunt Linda laughed too, not a real laugh. That performative thing people do when they want to show they're on someone's side. I signed the paper. Brad looked surprised. I think he expected me to argue, to negotiate, to beg for better terms. That's what he would have done. That's how his brain works. Everything is a transaction. Everything has a counteroffer. But I just signed it, picked up his fancy Mont Blanc pen, and scrawled my signature on the line. The ink was smooth. Expensive pens write different than the cheap ones. There's less resistance. The line just flows. He took the document back, checked the signature, then relaxed. I watched the tension drain out of his shoulders. He'd won. In his mind, he'd just outmaneuvered the poor idiot cousin who'd wasted 5 years playing nurse. Now he could flip the property or tear it down and sell the land, or whatever his plan was. He had what he wanted. I stood up, told him I'd be back in the evening to clear out the garage. Brad said to make it quick. He wanted the house emptied by Friday. Some contractor was coming to do an estimate on the demo work. I drove home in a daze. Home being a rented room above a pizzeria on the east side. The kind of place where the grease smell seeps into your clothes and you stop noticing after a few weeks. My Honda Civic made this clicking sound every time I hit a bump. The suspension was shot. Had been shot for about 6 months. I kept meaning to fix it, but between work and taking care of Grandpa, there was never time, never money, either. I sat in the parking lot for a while, engine off, watching the afternoon light fade. My phone said it was 4:30. I had 3 hours before I needed to be at work. Night shift at a data center downtown. Server maintenance. Climate control monitoring. The kind of job where nothing happens 99% of the time, and then 1% of the time everything happens at once, and you earn your entire paycheck in 15 minutes of crisis management. I checked my bank account on my phone. $842.50. That was everything. Checking, savings, all of it. No debt, at least. No credit cards, no car payment, no student loans. But no assets either. Just 800 and change and a 12-year-old Honda that sounded like it was dying. At 6 o'clock, I drove back to Grandpa's house. The sun was setting, painting everything orange and purple. It would have been beautiful if I'd been in the mood to notice. It started raining as I pulled into the driveway. Not hard, just that cold autumn drizzle that soaks through everything. I backed the Honda up to the garage door, popped the trunk and the back seats forward. The car sat low on its suspension. I was going to load it heavy. The garage was exactly how Grandpa had left it. Nobody had touched anything. Why would they? To Brad and Linda, this was all junk. Outdated equipment from a dead hobby. They probably thought I was doing them a favor, hauling away their trash. I started with the boxes. Cardboard file boxes, the kind with the lift-off lids, stacked against the back wall. Inside were schematics, circuit diagrams, service manuals for equipment that hadn't been manufactured since before I was born. Grandpa's handwriting covered the margins, notes and calculations, and frequency annotations. His writing had gotten shakier in the last few years, but it was still there. Still him. I packed those first. Then the components. Transformers, capacitors, coils of copper wire, boxes of vacuum tubes wrapped in newspaper from the 80s. I didn't sort anything, just grabbed and loaded. The rain was picking up, and I didn't want to make multiple trips. The radio equipment was heavier. The Collins KWM, 2 transceiver weighed probably 60 pounds. Solid metal case, boat anchor construction, built back when they made things to last. Grandpa used to say that radio was the last thing he'd sell if times got hard. I'd seen him turn down offers from collectors. Good offers. 4 figures. He always said no. I carried it to the car like I was carrying a body. Gentle. Careful. My back screamed in protest, but I didn't care. By the time I'd loaded everything that would fit, the Honda's rear end was dragging. I'm talking the bumper was maybe 3 inches off the ground. The suspension was compressed completely. When I hit a pothole leaving the driveway, the whole car bottomed out with this horrible scraping sound. I drove 5 miles under the speed limit all the way across town. Every bump felt like the car was going to break in half. My room wasn't big enough for all this stuff. Not even close. I stacked boxes in corners, under the bed, in the closet. The radio equipment I put on the desk, pushing aside my laptop and the stack of bills I'd been avoiding. The room smelled like old electronics now, that specific scent of aged components and metal and dust. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by boxes, and felt absolutely nothing. Not sad, not angry, not relieved, just empty, hollow, like a server with a corrupted drive. The hardware is fine, but the data's gone. I needed to be at work in 2 hours. I should have showered, changed clothes, eaten something. Instead, I started going through the file boxes. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was looking for something specific. Maybe I just needed to keep my hands busy. Maybe I couldn't stand the idea of sitting still. Most of it was technical documentation, radio theory, FCC regulations from the 70s, ham radio call signs, and QSL cards from contacts Grandpa had made with people all over the world. Japan, Australia, Germany. Little cards confirming two-way radio contact, like postcards from a hobby that used to mean something. Then I found a yellow envelope. It was wedged between 2 spiral-bound notebooks, the kind Grandpa used for logging his radio contacts. The envelope was official-looking, heavy paper, a return address from Washington, D.C., Federal Communications Commission printed in blue ink across the top. Inside was a single document, 8 pages, stapled in the corner. Authorization for specialized mobile radio service. The words didn't click right away. I read them 3 times before my brain started processing what I was looking at. This wasn't a ham radio license. Those are public, recreational, non-commercial. This was something else. Something Grandpa had never mentioned. Not once in 5 years of living with him, of helping him maintain his equipment, of listening to his stories about the old days. The license listed a specific frequency allocation, 800 megahertz, commercial band, the kind of spectrum that cellular companies and emergency services use. The coverage area was the entire county. All of it, every tower, every transmission point, everything. There was a date issued, January 1987, 38 years ago, and there was an expiration date, My finger stopped on that line. I must have stared at it for a full minute, not breathing, not moving, just looking at those numbers. The license was still active, current, valid. It didn't expire for another 6 months. Outside my window, the rain had turned into a downpour. I could hear it hammering against the roof, running through the gutters, pooling in the parking lot below. Someone's car alarm was going off. The pizza place downstairs was closing, their kitchen fan shutting down with mechanical whine that rattled the walls. I sat there in my cramped room surrounded by boxes of junk that wasn't junk, holding a piece of paper that Brad had just given me for free because he was too stupid and too greedy to ask what intangible assets actually meant. The rain kept falling, and somewhere in the back of my head, I heard Grandpa's voice. Not a memory, exactly. More like an echo. Something he used to say when we were working on a particularly tricky repair. The signal is always there, Mike. You just have to tune the antenna. I looked down at the expiration date one more time. My hands had stopped shaking. I sat there for another 10 minutes, just staring at that expiration date. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, that white noise that usually helps me think. But my brain wasn't thinking. It was stuck in a loop, repeating the same 3 words over and over. 6 months left. The license was good for 6 more months. After that, it would lapse, revert back to the FCC for reallocation. Whoever owned it next would have to apply fresh, go through the whole process, prove they had legitimate use for the spectrum. But right now, for the next 183 days, this frequency belonged to the estate of Franklin Raymond Collins, which meant it belonged to me. I needed information. Real information, not guesses. The kind of data you can build a strategy around. My laptop was buried under a stack of Grandpa's schematics. I cleared space on the desk, pushing aside vacuum tubes and coils of wire, and opened the FCC's Universal Licensing System database. It's public. Anyone can search it. You just need to know what you're looking for. I pulled up the license number from the document and ran the search. The results loaded slowly. My internet connection in this place was terrible, some budget DSL line that the pizzeria downstairs let me piggyback on. The progress bar crawled across the screen like it was moving through mud. Then it populated. Authorization for specialized mobile radio service. Frequency allocation, 800 megahertz band. Geographic coverage, the entire county from the industrial parks on the east side all the way out to the suburbs in the west. Primary use, commercial two-way communication. Status, active. Renewal date, 6 months out. But that wasn't the interesting part. I opened a second tab and pulled up the FCC spectrum allocation map. This shows who owns what frequencies in what areas. The big carriers, AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile, they're all color-coded. Their coverage zones overlap like a Venn diagram, each one trying to fill in the gaps the others left. I zoomed in on our county. There it was, right in the middle of downtown, right where the business district clustered around the old courthouse and the new tech campus. There was a gap, not huge, maybe 2 square miles. But in spectrum terms, that's an eternity. It wasn't just random geography. It was a golden corridor, the exact stretch of highway connecting the financial district to the wealthy suburbs of North Shore. Every CEO, every banker, every hedge fund manager drove through that dead zone twice a day. Drop calls right in the middle of closing deals. For AT&T and Verizon, this wasn't just a coverage gap. It was a humiliation. Grandpa's license covered that exact area. I sat back in my chair. The pieces were starting to fit together. This wasn't just some random frequency allocation from the 80s. This was prime real estate. Digital beachfront property. The kind of thing that telecom companies would kill for, because without it, their fancy 5G networks had a dead zone right in the most valuable part of the city. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was smooth. Professional. Too professional. The way salespeople sound when they're trying to make you think they're doing you a favor. He introduced himself as a spectrum broker, said he worked with estates, helped families liquidate telecommunications assets they might not know they had. He'd heard that Franklin Collins had passed recently, his condolences, very sorry for my loss. But business is business, and he wanted to make me an offer. $20,000. Cash. Today. He could have someone at my location within 2 hours with a briefcase and a contract. All I had to do was sign over the license. Clean, simple, painless. I asked him how he got this number. He dodged the question. Said it didn't matter. Said what mattered was that I had something valuable, and he was prepared to pay fair market value for it. And wasn't that better than letting it expire? Fair market value. That phrase stuck in my head. I learned something in the server business. When someone comes at you with an urgent offer on something you didn't even know you were selling, the thing is worth way more than they're offering. It's basic economics. Nobody rushes to overpay. If this guy was offering $20,000 in cash, same-day delivery, that meant the real value was at least 10 times higher. Maybe more. Spectrum brokers don't work on thin margins. They're middlemen. They buy low from people who don't know what they have, then flip it high to corporations who need it. I told him I'd think about it, and hung up. The phone rang again 30 seconds later. Different number. Different voice. Same pitch. $25,000 this time. Also cash. Also today. I turned the phone off. The rain had stopped. It was almost midnight. I needed to sleep. Needed to be at work in 7 hours. But my brain wouldn't shut down. I kept running scenarios, calculating angles, trying to figure out what the smart play was. I pulled up my bank account on my phone. $783.50. The motel had charged me for the night. $59 plus tax. I was burning through my cushion fast. If I took the 25 grand, I could stop worrying about rent, buy a better car, maybe even take a week off work, decompress, figure out what came next. It was more money than I'd seen in one place in years. But that voice in my head, the one that sounded like Grandpa, kept asking the same question. If they're offering $25,000 today, what's it worth tomorrow? I spent the next 4 hours teaching myself telecommunications law, not the fun parts, the boring parts, the FCC regulations, the spectrum allocation guidelines, the transfer procedures. Here's what I learned. The license was an asset, a transferable asset, but you couldn't just sell it on Craigslist. There were rules. The buyer had to be a qualified entity. They had to prove they intended to use the spectrum for legitimate commercial purposes. The FCC had to approve the transfer. That process took time. Months, usually. Sometimes longer if there were disputes. Which meant I couldn't just flip this thing for quick cash, even if I wanted to. I needed representation. I needed someone who knew how to navigate the bureaucracy, who had contacts at the FCC, who could handle the legal paperwork without triggering an audit or a challenge from the big carriers. I needed a telecom attorney. The sun was coming up when I finally closed my laptop. My eyes felt like someone had rubbed sand in them. I'd missed work. I'd missed 3 calls from my supervisor. I was probably get written up, maybe fired, depending on how much goodwill I had left in the bank. I didn't care. I had a plan. Not a complete plan. Not even a good plan. But a plan. First step, find a lawyer. Second step, figure out how to pay for one. I pulled up Google and searched for telecommunications attorneys in the area. Most of them work for big firms downtown, the kind of places with glass lobbies and $100 an hour parking. Their websites had sliding image galleries and testimonials from Fortune 500 companies. I needed someone smaller, someone who might actually take my call. I found her on the 3rd page of search results. Margaret Vance, attorney at law, solo practice, specialization in FCC licensing and spectrum management. Her website looked like it had been built in 2008 and never updated. The photo showed a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. Her rates were listed right there on the homepage. $500 per hour. 5-hour minimum retainer for new clients. $2,500. I had $783.50. I sat there doing math in my head. I could pick up extra shifts, work doubles, maybe borrow from someone, though I couldn't think of who. Everyone I knew was as broke as I was. Then I looked at the boxes stacked around my room. Grandpa's equipment, his collection, The Collins KWM-2 sat on my desk, its metal case reflecting the morning light coming through the window. It was beautiful, in the way old machines are beautiful. Solid, purposeful. Every knob and dial and switch designed to do exactly one thing, and do it perfectly. Grandpa had turned down $4,000 for that radio. I was there when it happened. Some collector from Ohio had driven all the way out, cash in hand, ready to buy. Grandpa had thanked him for coming, offered him coffee, and sent him home empty-handed. He'd told me later that some things weren't for sale. That radio was one of them. I picked up my phone and searched for radio collectors in the area. Found a guy named Miller who ran an estate sale business, specializing in vintage electronics. His shop was in an industrial park on the far side of town, the kind of neighborhood that used to be warehouses and now was trendy lofts and craft breweries. I called him. He answered on the second ring. I told him I had a Collins KWM-2 in excellent condition, all original parts, working tubes. I could hear the interest in his voice. He asked if I could bring it by that afternoon. I said yes before I could change my mind. The drive across town took 40 minutes. My Honda bottomed out twice on potholes. The radio sat in a cardboard box on the passenger seat, wrapped in old newspapers. Every time I hit a bump, I winced, imagining tubes shattering inside the case. Miller's shop was in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and those big industrial windows. A bell chimed when I walked in. The place smelled like old electronics, and with polish. Shelves lined the walls, filled with radios and oscilloscopes and test equipment from decades past. Miller was exactly what I expected. Late 60s, white beard, suspenders. He looked like someone's grandfather, which probably helped his business. People trust grandfatherly types when they're selling off their inheritance. I set the box on his counter. He opened it carefully, peeling back the newspaper like he was unwrapping something fragile and precious, which I guess he was. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled the radio out, set it on the counter, and started examining it. He checked the serial number, tested the knobs, looked at the tube sockets through a magnifying glass. I watched his face. He was trying not to show excitement, but I could see it anyway. This was a good specimen, maybe a great one. Finally, he looked up at me. Asked me where I got it. I told him it was my grandfather's, that I was liquidating the estate. He nodded slowly, asked me what I wanted for it. Here's where it got hard. I could have haggled. I could have played it cool, acted like I knew what I was doing, tried to squeeze every dollar out of negotiation. But I didn't have time for games. I needed cash, and I needed it now, and we both knew it. I told him I needed $2,500. Today. He didn't even blink. Just asked if I had the original manual and power cable. I did. They were in the box. He went to his office and came back with a cash counter, one of those machines that flips through bills and tallies them automatically. The sound it made was hypnotic, mechanical, final. He counted out $2,800, said that's what the radio was worth, and he didn't feel right short of me just because I needed money fast. I took the cash with shaking hands. $2,800 in mixed bills, mostly hundreds and fifties. It felt heavy, dirty, somehow, even though the bills were clean. I looked down at the radio one more time. My throat felt tight. I'm coming back for it, I said, my voice tight. Don't sell it to anyone else. Please. Miller looked at me over his glasses, then at the cash on the counter. He was quiet for a moment. I run a business, son. I can't hold inventory forever. He paused and sighed. But I won't list it online for 30 days. That's the best I can do. I nodded. 30 days. I could work with 30 days. I almost said something. Almost told him I'd made a mistake, that I wanted the radio back, that I'd find another way to get the money. The words were right there in my throat. But I didn't. I just nodded, thanked him, and walked out. The bell chimed behind me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. The cash was in my jacket pocket. I could feel its weight. $2,800. Enough for the lawyer. Enough for a couple months of breathing room. I'd sold my connection to Grandpa for breathing room. The thought made me sick. But then I pulled out the FCC license document from my other pocket. Looked at it again. Remembered why I was doing this. Brad had taken the house. Fine. That was real estate. Bricks and wood and foundation problems. But he'd given me something worth more than the house. He'd given me leverage, power, a seat at a table he didn't even know existed. And I was going to use it. Margaret Vance's office was in a small building near the courthouse. 3 stories, old brick. The kind of place lawyers rent when they're good at what they do but don't care about impressing clients. I took the elevator to the 2nd floor. Her door had frosted glass with her name stenciled in black letters. I knocked. She answered it herself. No receptionist. No assistant. Just her, in a gray suit that had seen a few years but was well maintained, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. I introduced myself. Told her I had a telecommunications matter that needed legal representation. She looked me up and down. Took in the work boots. The jacket that didn't quite fit right. The nervousness I was trying to hide. I probably didn't look like her usual clientele, but she invited me in anyway. Her office was exactly what I expected. Law books on shelves. Filing cabinets. A desk with organized stacks of paper. No fancy art, no expensive furniture. Just functional space for functional work. I sat across from her and laid out the whole situation. The estate, the settlement agreement, the garage contents, the FCC license. I showed her the documents. Let her read through everything. She took her time. Didn't rush. I watched her eyes move across the pages, pausing on certain sections, flipping back to cross-reference things. When she finally looked up, she was smiling. Not a big smile. Just a slight curl at the corner of her mouth. She told me my cousin was an idiot. Those were her exact words. Your cousin is an idiot, Mike. She pointed to Section 4.B of the settlement agreement, the part about intangible assets. She explained that Spectrum licenses are intangible assets. They're not physical property. They're rights, permissions, authorizations. The FCC doesn't care who owns the land. They care who owns a license to use the airwaves over that land. Brad had signed over those rights to me. Voluntarily. Legally. Irrevocably. I owned the air above his head. She laid out the next steps. We'd need to file a transfer application with the FCC. We'd need to establish my standing as a legitimate heir to the license. We'd need to prepare for challenges from the state or from Brad directly once he figured out what he'd done. But more importantly, we needed to figure out what I wanted to do with the license. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. We don't negotiate, Mike. That's a beggar's game. We start a war. I looked at her. A sealed bid auction. We invite the big 3 carriers into a room, put the license on the table, and let them fight for it. Winner takes all. Loser explains to their shareholders why the Golden Corridor is still a dead zone. She smiled, and this time was a shark smile. And as for your cousin, she said, let's invite him too. He needs to see exactly what he gave away. I asked her about her retainer. She confirmed it. $500 per hour. 5 hours minimum. $2,500 to start. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the cash. $2,800. I counted out $2,500 and slid it across the desk. She took it, counted it herself, wrote me a receipt. Then she stood up and extended her hand. I stood up and shook it. Her grip was firm, dry, professional. We had a deal. I walked out her office, feeling different. Lighter, somehow, even though I just spent almost all the money I had in the world. The sun was setting. The courthouse across the street was lit up with those warm yellow lights that make old buildings look timeless. I had representation. I had a strategy. I had momentum. And somewhere across town, Brad was probably drinking expensive scotch and congratulating himself on getting the house for free. He had no idea what was coming. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building I'd never been inside before. Glass and steel. The kind of place where the elevator buttons are touch-sensitive and the lobby is abstract art that probably cost more than my old Honda. Margaret Vance had arranged everything, sent out the invitations, filed the paperwork with the FCC, vetted the bidders. She'd told me to show up at 9 in the morning wearing something that didn't have oil stains on it. I bought a suit, nothing fancy, off the rack from a department store, but it fit and it was clean, and when I looked at myself in the mirror that morning, I barely recognized the guy staring back. The conference room had windows that ran floor to ceiling, looking out over the city. You could see the whole Golden Corridor from up here, that stretch of highway connecting money to the people who had it. From this height, it looked peaceful, organized. You couldn't see the dropped calls or the buffering or the rage of executives stuck in traffic with dead phones. 3 groups were already seated when I walked in. The T-Mobile team was young, tech casual, button-down shirts with no ties. One of them had a laptop open, running what looked like a coverage analysis program. They nodded at me when I entered. Professional, cautious. The AT&T representatives were older, suits that actually were fancy. One of them had cufflinks that caught the light when he moved. They didn't acknowledge me at all, just kept talking quietly among themselves, reviewing documents in leather folders. The third group was harder to read. 2 people, a woman in her 40s wearing designer glasses, and a man who looked like he worked out twice a day. No corporate logos, no branded materials. Margaret had mentioned they were from a private investment fund, the kind that buys assets and flips them or licenses them or holds them ransom. Vulture capital, some people called it. I sat down at the head of the table. Margaret took the seat to my right. She brought her own folder, thick with documents, the settlement agreement, the FCC license, transfer applications, every piece of paper that proved I owned what we were about to sell. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of expensive fabric. Nobody was talking. This wasn't a negotiation. There would be no back and forth, no haggling, just sealed bids and one winner. Margaret had explained the rules the night before. Each group would submit a written offer in a sealed envelope. We'd open them all at once. Highest bid wins. No second chances. No do-overs. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal. She was about to call the room to order when the door slammed open. Brad. He looked different than the last time I'd seen him. His suit was wrinkled. His hair wasn't as perfectly styled. The veneer of success he'd worn so carefully had cracked, and you could see something desperate underneath. Behind him was a man in a cheaper suit carrying a briefcase. His lawyer, I assumed. The kind you hire when you can't afford the good ones anymore. Brad's face was red. His voice was loud. He started talking before he was even fully in the room. He said the auction was illegal, fraudulent, a conspiracy to defraud the estate. He was the rightful owner of everything in his grandfather's house, and that included any licenses or permits or whatever legal mumbo-jumbo we were trying to sell. He pulled papers from his briefcase, waved them around like they were evidence of something. His lawyer tried to calm him down, put a hand on his shoulder, but Brad shrugged him off. The corporate lawyers looked at him the way you'd look at a crazy person on the subway, with a mix of pity and annoyance and the hope that someone else would handle it. I didn't turn around. I just kept looking out the window at the city below. Margaret stood up. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. She just picked up a copy of the settlement agreement from her folder and walked it over to the AT&T team's lawyer. She told him to turn to section 4.b. He read it. His eyebrows went up. He passed it to his colleague, who also read it. Then they both looked at Brad with something between amusement and secondhand embarrassment. Margaret's voice was steady and cold. She said that Mr. Bradley Collins had voluntarily transferred all intangible assets located in the property's garage and workshop to Michael Collins. She said the FCC license was an intangible asset. She said the transfer was legally binding and had been executed with proper consideration. She said if Mr. Bradley Collins continued to disrupt these proceedings, she would call building security and have him removed. One of the T-Mobile guys actually laughed, tried to cover it with a cough, but it was too late. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Brad's face went from red to purple. You could see the moment it hit him, the realization. He'd sign away millions of dollars because he thought intangible meant worthless. He'd given me the golden ticket because he was so focused on the house, on the real estate, on the thing he could see and touch and flip for profit. He'd save himself the cost of hauling junk to the dump, and it had cost him everything. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, probably telling him to leave before this got worse. Brad looked at me one more time. I still didn't turn around. I heard his footsteps, the door closing, the blessed silence that followed. Margaret returned to her seat. She smoothed her skirt, looked around the table. She apologized for the interruption, asked if everyone was ready to proceed. They were. She laid out 3 envelopes on the table. Each group had submitted their sealed bid before the meeting. This wasn't a dramatic reveal where people wrote numbers on slips of paper. This was corporate due diligence. Each offer came with terms, conditions, timelines, contingencies, legal documents, not napkin math. Margaret opened the first envelope. T-Mobile, $4.5 million. Cash offer, 30-day close. Standard terms. It was a good number, a life-changing number. More money than I'd ever imagined having. But we had 2 more envelopes to go. She opened the second one. The investment fund, $8.2 million. Also cash. Faster close, 20 days. But they wanted an option to sublicense, which meant they'd buy from me and then rent it out to whoever needed it, making money forever off something they bought once. Margaret had advised me against deals like that. She said they were designed to make the middleman rich while the original owner got a one-time payout and watched from the sidelines. The number was better, though, almost double T-Mobile's offer. I kept my face neutral, didn't react. Neither did the corporate teams. They were professionals. They knew how this worked. Margaret picked up the third envelope. AT&T. She opened it slowly, pulled out the document, read it to herself first. Her poker face was better than mine, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Just for a second, she read the number out loud. $14,200,000. The room was silent, not the awkward silence from before. This was different. This was the silence of people doing math in their heads, recalculating their assumptions, wondering if they'd missed something. But Margaret wasn't done reading. She said the offer included a gross-up provision. That meant AT&T would pay the taxes on top of the purchase price. Whatever I owed to the IRS, to the state, to anyone, they'd cover it. The $14.2 million was mine, clear. She said they were also offering a consulting contract. $50,000 a year for 5 years to consult on spectrum management in the region. It was a courtesy payment, really. A way to keep me happy, keep me from causing problems down the line. The total package, when you added it all up, was somewhere north of $16 million. The T-Mobile rep closed his laptop. He knew he was out. The investment fund people stood up, thanked us for the opportunity, and left without saying anything else. They were professionals. No hard feelings. That's just business. The AT&T team stayed seated. The one with the cufflinks slid a contract across the table. It was already prepared. They'd been confident in their offer. Margaret took it, read through it page by page. I watched her face. She was looking for traps, for gotchas, for the fine print that would turn a win into a loss. After 15 minutes, she looked at me and gave a small nod. It was clean. She asked if I wanted time to think about it. I didn't. I told her I'd take the offer. She produced a pen. Not a cheap one. A Parker black lacquer with gold trim. The kind of pen you use to sign important documents. She'd probably bought it specifically for this. She laid the contract in front of me, showed me where to sign. I picked up the pen. It was heavier than I expected. Balanced. The tip touched the paper, and the ink flowed smooth and dark. My signature looked different than usual. More confident, maybe. Or maybe I was just paying attention to it for the first time in my life. The AT&T lawyer countersigned. Then Margaret. Then the other AT&T representative as a witness. It was done. They shook my hand. Firm grips. Professional smiles. They told me the first wire transfer would hit my account within 48 hours. They'd be in touch about the consulting agreement. Welcome to the AT&T family. Then they left, and it was just me and Margaret in that conference room with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the golden corridor. She told me congratulations. I didn't feel anything. Not joy, not relief, not triumph. Just a weird kind of emptiness, like I'd been holding my breath for so long that I'd forgotten how to exhale. She said she'd handle the paperwork with the FCC, get the transfer processed, make sure everything was legal and binding. Her fee would come out of the first payment. We'd already agreed on the number. I thanked her. She packed up her files, told me to go celebrate, buy something stupid, take a vacation, do whatever people do when they suddenly have money. I told her I would, but I didn't know if I meant it. 3 months later, I drove past the old house. I wasn't planning to. I was just taking a different route to avoid traffic, and suddenly there it was. Same driveway, same front porch, same oak tree in the yard, but there was a sign on the lawn now, red letters on white, foreclosure. I pulled over, sat there with the engine running. I'd heard through the family grapevine that Brad had taken out loans, big ones. He'd borrowed against the house's estimated value, planning to fix it up and flip it, but the repairs had cost more than the estimates. The foundation issues that Grandpa had known about, that I'd known about, that Brad had never bothered to ask about, they'd eaten through his budget like termites. He couldn't sell it, couldn't fix it, couldn't make the payments. The bank had taken it back. As I sat there, the front door opened. Brad walked out onto the porch. He looked older, thinner. The BMW was gone from the driveway. In its place was a dented Toyota that had seen better days. He saw my car, saw me sitting inside. For a second, I thought about driving away, but I didn't. I got out, walked up the path to the porch. He stood there watching me. His expression was hard to read. Shame, maybe anger, resignation. All of it mixed together. I pulled out my checkbook. The fancy one the bank had given me when I'd opened my new account. The one for the account with the $9 million in it, after taxes and Margaret's fee and all the rest. I wrote a check, $5,000. I tore it out and handed it to him. He looked at it, looked at me. I told him it was for rent and utilities. For the 5 years I'd lived there taking care of Grandpa. For the food I'd eaten and the electricity I'd used. I told him I always paid my debts. He took the check with shaking hands. I didn't wait for him to say anything. Just turned around and walked back to my car. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't revenge. It was something else. It was me closing the loop, settling the account, making sure that whatever happened next, I didn't owe him anything, and he didn't owe me anything. We were even. I drove away and didn't look back. My new place was a loft in the renovated warehouse district. Exposed brick, high ceilings, big windows. The kind of space I'd always imagined living in, but never thought I could afford. It wasn't flashy. I hadn't bought a mansion, or a sports car, or any of the stupid things people do when they get sudden money. Margaret had introduced me to a financial advisor, someone who wouldn't let me blow it all on nonsense. But I had bought one thing. The Collins KWM. 2 sat on a custom-built desk in the corner of the main room. I'd gone back to Miller's shop the day after the auction, offered him $10,000 for it, 3 times what he'd paid me. He'd smiled, said he'd been hoping I'd come back. The radio looked right sitting there, like it had found its proper home. I'd had it serviced. New tubes were needed, cleaned and calibrated. It worked perfectly. I turned it on. The tubes warmed up slowly, that characteristic glow of old electronics. The dial lit up. I turned the frequency knob, scanning through the bands. Static, voices, music, Morse code, the whole electromagnetic spectrum laid out in sound. I thought about Grandpa, about what he used to say. The signal is always there. You just have to tune the antenna. He'd been talking about radios. But he'd also been talking about life, about paying attention, about noticing the things that other people missed because they were too busy, too distracted, too focused on the obvious. Brad had seen a house full of junk. I'd seen a license worth millions. He'd been looking at the noise. I'd been listening for the signal. I adjusted the dial one more time, found a clear frequency. Just a pure carrier wave, no modulation. Clean. Perfect. I closed my eyes and listened. The world was full of signals. Most people only heard the noise. But if you paid attention, if you really listened, if you tuned your antenna just right, you could hear the music. I smiled. First time in months. Maybe first time in years. The radio hummed quietly in the corner. The city lights flickered outside my window. And somewhere out there, in the golden corridor, in that stretch of highway I'd never drive through again, people were making calls that didn't drop. The signal was clean.